What's wrong with Chinese society is there's no order to it. Now, he's not a heavy-handed disciplinarian. He's going to say through education, we have to educate one another to the necessity and the value of having order. And then he's going to establish order. It's what I call a four-legged stool. It's based on 4 principles that I'll share with you, and you're going to see these on your quiz. And then I'm going to detail some of them. You're going to see a lot of Chinese language, or a decent amount of Chinese language. You're going to have to know the language to do well on your quiz. Any questions about that? So I've got a 5-minute video. This fellow explains some of this, and then I'm going to go into more detail for you so that you can do well on your quiz.
What is the problem that Confucianists define as central?
And then we have to do it this way. There you go.
Define as central, and what's their solution?
Well, the problem is chaos. The problem is lack of social order. That society is falling apart. This is a tradition that emerges at a period when China is sort of lapsing into warring states, and people are worried about society falling apart. And so Confucianism takes its aim at that problem and says, listen, our goal is social harmony. Our goal is social order. And how do you do that? Like, how do you create that? And the answer is ritual. Ritual and etiquette and being kind to one another, virtue ethics, that's what's going to make for a stable and harmonious society. It doesn't really sound all that religious. I mean, and there are some people who say, well, this is really a philosophy, but this is an ethic. But underneath all this is the idea that there is an order in heaven, heaven as a kind of impersonal divinity. And what we want to do is bring the heavenly order to the earthly realm. And the way to do that is to act as we're supposed to act toward one another, to do the right etiquette vis-a-vis one another, and to follow a series of rituals that will make us feel close to, empathetic toward one another. And that's the Confucian way of life.
And isn't education also a part of this?
Absolutely. And, Confucius was a teacher. And I have to say that my heart as a teacher really warms towards Confucianism, because this, more than any other religion, with a possible exception of Judaism, is the one that really values learning. And it says, look, how are you going to hold a society together with people who don't understand their traditions, who don't...
So I hadn't planned on stopping, but I want to stop because this raises a question, and you have to trust that I'm not offended by what you say. So Confucius realizes that society is unordered and needs structure. How many of you do not see the value of the structure in this classroom? It's okay if you don't. I mean, I'm not offended. I'm not going to change what I do because I see the value in it. But do you follow what I'm saying to you? So I'm not being rude. I don't mean it this way, but I notice every time I come into anybody's class, it's always chit chat, 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 chat. That's just the way people are. People want us. We're social beings, and that's what he's talking about here. The problem with society, if it's not structured, is it quickly falls into chaos and conflict, and then it can be destructive. So for him, he says, order is necessary to establish the structure so that we can all operate in the least conflicted way. And that requires that we have structure, whatever the structure is going to be. So how many of you feel that the structure that I impose on the class imposes or interferes with you? Like when I say you have to quit talking. And I know you're not done. I don't mean that in a rude way. I know you're not done. I get that. You're not ready to put your phones away or to put them aside, and not text periodically. Yeah, I know that. But how many of you, anybody want to find the courage to? Okay, so here's the even bigger one. Well, 2 bigger ones. Is this kind of structure in any other class? I won't tell anyone. No, it isn't. Okay. Do you feel more benefited with structure or without structure in other classes? Serious now. Go ahead, dear. More structure? Go ahead. Say the last part. More structure?
Because you kind of force us to pay attention.
I force?
not like forced, but like there's.
That's okay, I just-
like structure to pay attention, rather than like when we're in class with like no structure, no order, and we kind of do find ourselves chit chatting and we're not paying attention as much.
Okay. What other feedback? Give me other feedback. Look, I don't need to hear this from me, trust me, because I hear this from faculty who'll say, well, what are you doing? Everyone's talking. Really? That was sarcasm, by the way. Really? It's like, what do you mean you have rules in your classroom? You realize when you go out to your car, rules cause the car to operate the way you want it to. It's called the rules of physics. Everything is run by rules. There's no way to get away from structure. Even planned chaos is structure. The problem is when we have no way to manage that chaos. In fact, I'm inclined to think that most structure is managed chaos. In this society, because we all want to be able to do what we want to do, we've talked about that, why not? But we have to manage the chaos. So what Confucius is talking about, he's in a culture that's chaotic, that just spontaneously breaks out in war and interferes with everybody's life. And the place that structure begins is in the classroom. Education teaches us the value of structure. Now, you may not agree with it. Next week, we're going to get into Taoism, and the Taoist says, pardon my French, screw structure. I want to be a free spirit. Well, don't we all? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness according to your will and your goals, as long as you don't interfere with someone else's happiness. They're not incompatible with one another. But I want you to understand the reason that he places such an emphasis on structure and then education is because there seems to be a relevance that comes out of order. Doesn't always work. Theories have an upside, theories have a downside. Are there other classes where there's no structure? I don't want names of faculty, but where there's no structure at all? You're in classes like that? Really? Okay. Do you learn as much in there? I mean, maybe you do. You don't necessarily need, really? No. Does anybody, here's the really, do any of you ever volunteer and say, really, structure? Free at last, yeah, no structure. Okay, well, I just wanted to make a point about Confucius then. About another 4 minutes of this, and then, oh, hang on, I want to raise the volume too and turn this down. Maybe this will, be careful, it's about to come.
Understand their history, who haven't read their classic texts. And the answer is you can't, according to Confucians, and that's why learning was so important. Confucius was a teacher. He went around as a kind of itinerant teacher, teaching people to read the great Chinese classics, and that's what Confucianism continues to stand for today.
And when did he live, and what did he was a teacher. I know in the book you compare him actually to Socrates in the methodology that he used, the questioning that he used with his students.
Well, that's right, and he is, he's a 6th century and 5th century BC figure in China. So he's around, or he's there around the time of the Buddha, in the sort of what's sometimes called the axial age. The Buddha, of course, is off in India, not in China. But he emerges then, and he tries to get government work. He's never really that successful. He ends up being a teacher who goes around and tells people, listen, we need to cultivate these 2 virtues. You know, one is called ren, which is human-heartedness, and the other is called li, which is translated as sometimes ritual or etiquette or propriety. And the 2 are related to one another. One is sort of more a kind of fellow feeling, or we might say empathy or benevolence or love even, that's ren. And then li is this idea of just doing the right thing in the right situation. And that's what is going to make us human. You become human in the Confucian tradition by being social, by being engaged with one another, by being part of community, not at all through individual freedom, like we think of with, say, the Transcendentalists in America, or like will emerge with the Taoists in China. Mm-hmm. So he's really emphasizing these 2 mutually reinforcing values of ren and li.
Confucianism is sometimes thought of by people as being rather rigid and hierarchical in its norms, in the way it plays out. You know, that subjects submit to rulers, children submit to parents. There seems to be this rigid hierarchical order, and that the ceremonies or the rituals go with it. How do you respond to that description?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that this is probably the most anti-American religion in the book.
Anti-American in what sense?
Well, anti-American, I guess anti-American is the wrong phrase, but un-American. That's where I'm going. Un-American, because, you know, America is so much, first of all, about youth, but it's also about egalitarianism. You know, equality is one of the great American virtues. And Confucianism says that there are really 5 relationships in society, and what keeps society harmonious is everybody knowing their role in those relationships. So you have the ruler and the subject, and the subject should be like a subject, and the ruler should be like a ruler. So the ruler should boss people around, and the subject should, you know, bow down and agree. Parent-child is the second one, husband-wife, older brother, younger brother, and friend to friend. And all of those, except for friend to friend, are hierarchical relationships where one person's in charge and the other person's supposed to be obedient. This doesn't sound good to us.
So pause again for that. We live in a society where there's very little social hierarchy. I mean, I'm professor and you're students, but, you know, we can talk on a level playing field. Often we do. In some societies, there's a very strict hierarchy, and that maintains order so chaos doesn't occur. I remember when President Obama went to Japan and he met the Emperor of Japan. Now, the Emperor in Japan is considered to be a divine figure. It's been throughout history. And when President Obama greeted him, he greeted him in the fashion that the Orient does. They respect one another's position. And that raised a big row. The American president doesn't bow to anyone. Well, you bow to me, you just don't formally bow to me. We do have a structure. It's just not as rigid or purposeful. There's an interesting, any of you guys see Ronin 47? It's an interesting, it's a Japanese movie. It's about some samurai soldiers, and I don't want to go into detail, but they're discredited, and the leader is put in literally a hole in the ground for a year. And when, what's his name, do you remember? Oshi? He comes out of it, and he's reunited with his family, and you know he's been in a hole literally for a year, and he sits down to have a meal with his family. He's got his wife and his son, and he says, "Where are my men?" And someone says, "Well, they're camped out somewhere. They're kind of in hiding because someone else has taken over this realm that his leader was in charge of," and then he wants to know where, and it turns out it's. I always want to say Tom Cruise, Keanu Reeves, who's a Westerner who's been educated in Japan, and he's part of the community, although he's kind of you got to keep him to the side because he's really not Japanese. And then this interesting thing happens. The fellow who's the head of the samurais looks at his son, and they're just sitting there having dinner, and he says, "I need 3 horses." And the boy just looks at him. I mean, you just got out of a hole in the ground for a year. And the father says, "I need 3 horses." And the boy looks at him, and the father, in a very gentle voice, says, "Now." And the boy stands up. They sit on the ground. The boy stands up, and he honors his father's command, and he goes off and he gets 3 horses.